Good afternoon, my friend. Did you know that there's a Christian legal society and that it's based in the Washington, D.C. area? Well, there is, and I'm going to be talking with its Chief Executive Officer, David Nammo. David Nammo is the CEO of the Christian Legal Society, and so let's find out more about CLS on Weekend Connection. Let's get connected. Good afternoon. Welcome to Weekend Connection on the Bible Broadcasting Network. My name is Ed Phillips, and today I have the pleasure of talking with David Nammo. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Christian Legal Society in Springfield, Virginia. Is that right, David?
That's right, just outside of Washington, D.C.
How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
I do appreciate you taking time to talk with me and to talk with our listeners who are listening to Weekend Connection today. David, can you bring us up to speed on Christian Legal Society, when it got started, why it got started, and really just some of the backstory?
I'm happy to. Thank you, Ed. When most people hear the phrase Christian Legal Society, they usually have a picture in their head, and it's usually a religious liberty advocate. And the reality is Christian Legal Society's been around for some time, and even before many of the issues that are the topic of conversation in churches and in homes every day, CLS has been around for a long time. We were founded back in 1961. Christian lawyers had been running into each other at American Bar Association meetings for the starting in the late 50s, and the crowd began to grow. And in 1961, it got so big they said, "Why don't we start something?" And so they started the Christian Legal Society, and that really was our first ministry. And I'll discuss all four ministries as I describe where we are today. So we began what we call attorney ministries. And now we have over 50 chapters, volunteer-driven, all over the country, where Christian lawyers and Christian professionals in the law gather and pray regularly and have speakers and host prayer breakfasts around their bar association meetings and any number of events. And so that was in 1961. Within a year, we started our second ministry called Law Student Ministries. And we started a campus ministry so that Christians going through law school, which is generally a hostile place to anybody with faith, could have a group to gather with, to pray with, to encourage, to be an oasis in law school, as some people have called us. So for over 55 years, we've been on law school campuses, reaching those campuses for Christ and being a place where Christians can gather. And there are other groups on law school campuses, the Jewish groups and the Asian groups and the black groups, and we're the Christian group. We've been there for a long time.
So 1961, I'm thinking, David, in the providence of God, that was what, 3 or 4 years before prayer was taken out of schools. Is that right?
I don't have in my head the year that prayer was taken out of schools, but, those battles began to be fought in the mid to late 60s and continued through the early 70s. But I'll get to that because that becomes our third ministry. Back when prayer began to be questioned in schools and in God We Trust was going to be taken off the coin and all sorts of stuff, kind of the time when the ACLU was feeling its oats. And many of your listeners may remember the 60s and the 70s, and many of your listeners may not have any memory of the late 60s and 70s, but it was a time of change in this country, whether good or for bad. And it certainly was a time that religious liberty began to be an issue. There were no other groups to respond when this was all going on. And I joke with folks, we were the only group that people were coming to us going, "You need to do something about this." In 1975, the Christian Legal Society started our Center for Law and Religious Freedom. And this has been around for, over 40 years now. And we have been fighting for religious liberty longer than any other group. We have been fighting for the religious liberty for all Americans. And back in the 70s and 80s, it was not very popular to fight for religious liberty. People would say, "Oh, no, you just need to fight for the religious rights of Christians." And back then we'd say, "Look, if we don't fight for religious liberty as a principle, one day we're going to be in trouble, right? So if we fight for the religious freedom for all Americans, one day when Christianity will come to a place where people don't think it's a good religion, we're going to be able to have the same rights as every other religion."
And going back to the 60s and 70s, and I remember those days, and especially the 60s, and when abortion was the issue leading up to Roe v. Wade and all of that.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the time of big legal decisions, right? The Warren Court and the Center for Law and Religious Freedom made huge strides in this country. We helped draft and pass the Equal Access Act, which has allowed every ministry for K through 12 in this country to stay on those campuses. So Child Evangelism Fellowship and Fellowship of Christian Athletes and all this stuff. And most people don't realize Christian Legal Society had a hand in that.
That's
And
great.
thank you. In the 90s. Nobody, up until recently, nobody knew what the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was, the RFRA Act. But we're one of the groups that helped, one of the leading groups that helped draft and pass RFRA back in the 90s, right? Bipartisan support, signed into law by a Democratic president. And then when the High Court struck that down, we drafted a law called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. And we got that through Congress as well. In addition to the fact we've been representing groups like Child Evangelism Fellowship, like Fellowship of Christian Athletes, like Campus Crusade, like University Christian Fellowship, like you name the ministry, and from big to small to never heard of to everybody's heard of. We've represented them over the last 40 plus years in their disputes. Back when we started, there were no other groups doing this, and now there are a handful of groups doing this. And it's good to see that the church is slowly waking up to the importance of religious freedom.
Well, it's
Um,
amazing, really, how days have changed from you talking about the '60s and the '70s, and it's needed so much more now, more than ever.
Agreed. Although it was needed back then too, because back when it was a time when we were not going to be fought to lay the foundations for religious freedom. We were able to get laws passed. We were able to get court cases decided when they weren't controversial. But now, when you say religious freedom, everybody assumes that you have an opinion and that you're either good or bad on that. And back in the 80s and the 90s, everybody was in support of religious freedom. So it was good to be there in the foundational years so that now when we try to build or defend or even take advances, there's a foundation there. And CLS is blessed to have been part of that foundation.
I was noticing on your website Reconciliation Ministries, conciliation, and if you could just elaborate on that and what the Christian Legal Society does in regards to conciliation.
It's almost as if you and I are working off the same script. And for your listeners, we are not. We just happen to be going there. In the 80s, and that was the next thing I was going to talk about, a lot of the church started to hear more and more about Christian Legal Society, and a lot of the church says, look, we shouldn't sue each other, we shouldn't be in the courts, we shouldn't. How do we deal with these conflicts? And the one thing that we know the church struggles with is how to deal with conflict. And as a former mediator myself, I know that just getting people in a room and praying for it is a good start, but it doesn't resolve the conflict. It doesn't get people heard. And so in the 80s, we began to gather folks that cared about this issue, and we called it the Christian Conciliation Ministries. It was our fourth ministry at the time. And we started Christian Conciliation Centers all over the country. So Christians had a place to go that could help them resolve their conflicts. Churches had a place to refer people to. This network is still out there. Eventually, this network got so big and so diverse, we let it break off and become its own ministry. So the leader at the time was a gentleman named Ken Sandy, and he started something called Peacemaker Ministries. And Peacemaker Ministries, you can find on the internet, is really kind of the leading Christian conciliation, Christian mediation organization in the country. And they, through a partnership with the Institute for Christian Conciliation, manage and refer cases. And I can tell you thousands upon tens of thousands of people have been blessed, and marriages have been saved, and businesses have come to reconciliation. Relationships have been healed through Peacemaker Ministries, which was our Christian Conciliation Ministries. They kind of call us their grandfather. And that was our fourth ministry, but we broke it off. And our last ministry, the fourth ministry we do today, happened because it's always dangerous when lawyers read the Bible and start taking it to heart. And there's all these commands that say, bring justice to the poor and the needy and defend the widow and the orphan. And those are biblical commands that only Christian lawyers can fulfill. And so we started Christian Legal Aid, although we took it as one of our mission, as part of our mission statement back in the 60s. It wasn't until 2000 that we voted to officially take on Christian Legal Aid. And so now we have Christian Legal Aid clinics all over the country. And these are for people that have fallen below the poverty line but that need a lawyer. And people think the poor don't need lawyers. They need food and they need shelter, but the poor do need lawyers.
Indeed.
The battered The battered wife needs a lawyer. The gentleman that's struggling to feed his family, that can't get his last employer to write that last check, right? Because he can't afford a lawyer, right? There are so many cases. The people trying to put their lives back together that have been through a 12-step program, or all these gospel rescue missions that are doing incredible work to rebuild lives. There's always a legal issue that keeps somebody from becoming a full member of society once again. They can't afford lawyers. I can't afford a lawyer at $1,000 an hour, or even $500 an hour. So we've started Christian legal aid clinics all over the country, and people can find them on our website, as they can find our Christian lawyer network if they're looking to hire a good Christian lawyer to do work that they need. Can all be found at christianlawyer.org. But that's our fourth ministry, Christian legal aid.
Let me follow up with a question on that. Do you, with the Christian legal aid, set, for example, a monetary line or boundary similar to like a public defender's office in a state, where if you make more money than, say, this amount, then they quote unquote can't be represented? Or how does that work specifically?
We leave that up to the clinics. We have founded this ministry with the belief that we shouldn't be controlling the clinics that are serving their neighbors, that we help train them, we help kind of identify them, we resource them, we help them fundraise, we help them build a board and gather the lawyers that are usually in our network to begin with, since we're really the only Christian lawyer network in the country, and that will be volunteering to help man these clinics. So we let them build their own requirements. But you're absolutely correct. There's usually a level of poverty that you have to meet before they will help you. But I know that there are a lot of clinics that will help anybody that walks through the door. And so I can't speak to each individual clinic. The best thing you can do is kind of find out what Christian legal aid clinic is in your area and go see what their restrictions are. Because, if somebody's making $25,000 a year and they're barely making ends meet, the clinic might help them, but I can't guarantee that. So in some cases, they're dictated by statute, but in some cases, they have their own limitations.
So really, these chapters take a good many pro bono cases, depending upon the requirements and the boundaries and what you're talking about.
Absolutely, the clinics, and that's really it. I'll just to review. Our four ministries are attorney ministries, which have volunteer lawyers that do fellowship and reflect Christ in the law and understand their vocation. The campus ministry, law student ministries, and then the Center for Law and Religious Freedom, and then Christian Legal Aid, which is a different network, a very different network than the others of Christian legal aid clinics. In some cases, we may not have a chapter, but we have a clinic. But in the best places, we've got a chapter, and we've got several clinics where the local lawyers are funneling their skills to help the poor in many places. For example, in Washington, D.C., there are two groups here. Actually, three groups here in the metropolitan area that have clinics in certain churches or in certain gospel rescue missions. And so they put out a table and set a schedule, and they help those they can help.
That is absolutely wonderful. David, I thank you for joining me today on Weekend Connection. And as we close our time together, if you could give a contact number and an email address for our listeners who may be interested in contacting you in Christian Legal Aid or Christian Legal Society.
Thank you, Ed. This has been a pleasure. If they want to learn more about the Christian Legal Society, they can find us on the internet at www.christianlawyer.org. That's christianlawyer.org. If they need to reach us by phone, it's 703-642-1070. That's 703-642-1070. And our email is clshq, that's CLS like Christian Legal Society, clshq@clsnet.org.
David Nammo, thank you for joining me today on Weekend Connection. And again, I appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule to talk with me and to talk with our Bible Broadcasting Network listeners. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Here's that contact information for you one more time. The telephone number, 703-642-1070. And the email address, clshq@clsnet.org. Weekend Connection is a public affairs program of the Bible Broadcasting Network. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you for listening to this feature, a production of BBN, the Bible Broadcasting Network. BBN provides 24-hour Christian programming, great Christian music, and Bible teaching. Listen to BBN by clicking the link in the description.